Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's poppin', Fantasy Champions? I just listened to the intro and I heard it sounded like Morgan Colby. Does that not what it sound like?
A little bit. I didn't have my headphones on, so I don't exactly
He's like
know.
putting his headphones in right as we start the show.
Literally.
Welcome on into the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Morgan Colby. It's Rick Lemon, as always. Today we will actually do the normal intro stuff because I just zoinked it on the last episode. Just totally get that out. Right before we started recording, we're big, avid NBA supporters. Or not supporters, fans. Fans is the right way of saying it.
That's the right way of saying that, yeah.
We're big NBA fans, and James Harden just got traded, so we were like, oh great, now we gotta talk about fantasy football for an hour.
Yeah.
But no, we're always excited to provide advice to the faithful few, I guess.
Of course.
So today we are going to talk about our 5 lessons learned from the 2020 fantasy football season. I feel like this entire month, based on the content strategy that we have for the next couple weeks, is all next week we're going to be doing some 2021 stuff, but it's mostly content that's related to recapping the season as a whole. So on this episode, we're going to talk about things we learned last year. I think we did 10 things. This year we're going to do 5.
I think we did 5 last year.
Did we do 5 last year?
I don't think we did 10.
Hopefully it doesn't take
Maybe
an hour.
we did do 10.
Back then we were doing 59-minute podcasts, so
Yeah.
forget that. So we'll give you our 5 of our biggest lessons that we learned this year, mistakes that we made, different stuff that we were looking forward to in 2020. There's a lot of stuff that I was thinking about, but I felt like I had already yelled at you before about.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and then there's one extra thing that we were disagreeing on before the show, so we might talk about that. If we don't, and I don't say anything about it, then it's not going to happen. Maybe on a different podcast. Different podcast. But before we jump in, check out our website, thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter at the FFChamps, on Instagram at thefantasychampions. You can like us at facebook.com/thefantasychampions. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, any of the other major podcasting platforms, hit, smash, and destroy that subscribe button, wherever it is. Just pick up your phone.
Mm-hmm.
Go to, me and Rick will do it with you. Go to the podcast app. Just type in podcast on your phone. If you're doing like it's a spotlight search on an iPhone, but whatever, it'll just show up eventually. And then click on our podcast. I'm gonna not accidentally play it.
I'm just gonna pretend I'm doing it.
Yeah, he's just pretending he's doing it. And then just click the button and subscribe to us. Real easy. And then share the podcast with your friends. And you can also do, while you're doing that, share a review.
Yeah, do it.
Just say, go say 5 stars.
Yeah.
We love you guys.
Mm-hmm. That'd be much appreciated.
Much appreciated.
Or, I mean, even if you say 5 stars, you guys are bums, but I still listen to you anyway.
Yeah,
I'll take
but
it.
you give the 5 stars. It's all that matters. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe there as well. Click the bell for notifications because subscribing is not enough. And then comment down below any lessons that you learned from the 2020 fantasy football season that you want to share with us and everyone else.
Yep.
Just type it in. Helps us out. So let's jump right in. Like I said, 5. So we'll start out with the first one. This is something that I added that I felt like I made mistakes on because it's just, I didn't want to put don't fall in love with players because I feel like falling in love with players is part of the game. Love AJ Brown. Love myself some AJ Brown. Yep. But not saying that he got hurt or anything, but and I love myself some Miles Sanders. So there's a lot of different situations that occurred this season, but don't invest high draft capital on injured players. Now, this seems like a self-explanatory thing, but like if a guy, I'm trying to think of an injury that's only like a couple months.
Just like an ankle sprain or something?
Yeah, like an ankle sprain. Misses a month of the season. If that person falls to like the 8th or 9th round, fine. I don't care. Draft them. If you're using a top 5 round pick on a player that got hurt, you're making a mistake. Now, I'm not talking about the ankle injuries or the things that'll hold players out for 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, right? I'm talking about when a player gets a hamstring injury.
Kenny Galladay.
Miles Sanders gets a hamstring injury in the preseason.
Okay.
And you think it's totally fine. Example, I just said Miles Sanders. I was hyping up Miles Sanders for a very long time during the offseason. Thought he was going to be a top 5 running back this year. I was going to draft him in the first round of my fantasy draft. Had a plan on that. If I was like pick 7, I would have drafted him there because I love Miles Sanders. But then he got his hamstring injury, and it was like a debate in my mind of should I not draft Miles Sanders because of the hamstring injury. And right. I chose to draft Miles Sanders. Now, that didn't necessarily affect his whole season, hamstring-wise. Like, he was fine for the most part when he came back from it. But a lot of times when you draft a guy like Rick gave an example, Kenny Golladay, I don't know when he got hurt.
It was I think, after the season started. I think it was like week 2 or 3. It was like in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, so you probably didn't draft him. But if you're going out, and one thing that I always like to say, and something that I learned this year, and I'm going to try to live by in the future, is if a guy gets injured, you're already taking risks in fantasy football and trying to make predictions. Don't chase injuries. Like, if you start running around and chasing it, there's one guy in our home league. He ended up losing in the playoffs in like the semis. Was that what happened?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He traded for, I think, 4 injured running backs. And I'm like, dude, that's just... Somehow he made the playoffs, got a bye week, everything. And just, I'm like, why would you do that? That never worked.
It did backfire on him, though.
It did backfire on him. And
one of the injured running backs was Christian McCaffrey.
Yes. So, but he ended up flipping that guy for Dalvin Cook.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
But anyway, so I don't just invest high draft capital or go chasing injuries at any position. I guess you could say the number one thing, the number one, not thing on our list, but the first lesson we learned was don't chase injuries.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've done in the past because I don't care. I just want the talent on my team. But it can definitely hurt you in the long run, especially if you do multiple with those guys.
Yeah.
The high draft capital on injured players. So when you first put this on this list, I thought you were talking about just injury prone players.
Yeah.
Which I was like, yeah. But
it's a soft take. Like, if you didn't know that,
it is kind of
it's
a
if
very
you didn't
soft
already
take.
know that,
it's
a soft take.
Yeah. Because you know my love for like Julio, but that would have backfired. I didn't draft Julio this year, and it's because he's getting old. I'm kind of done.
He's an elderly.
Back in the day, I loved Julio. But yeah, he was somebody that a lot of people drafted high, and he's a history injury prone player. He's had plenty of years where he plays through it, but he always gets injured. Some years he plays through it, some years he misses like 3 or 4 games. And then this year was one of those years where he missed like half the season pretty much. So, I think that you can take that into effect as well. But yeah, if the player's injured and they're like battling a hamstring injury and they're like, he won't play week 1, but he might be back week 2. That's something that you got to think about hard when you're drafting that high, and because at the top of the draft you're looking for guys that are pretty much your team. You're looking for the foundation of your team, and if you're gonna have a guy that you draft that has a hamstring injury that might miss a week and that might turn into like 3 or 4 weeks, you're gonna get put in a real big hole early on in the season, and you can always trade for guys that you really like. So, I do agree with this take.
Yep. He's like, I agree with it.
I agree with the take, even though it's kind of soft.
It might be soft, but like I said, it's one of those things that it needs to be said, because I think a lot of people like myself, you're so tempted, you fall in love with guys, and then Miles Sanders gets a hamstring injury, and it really is just about not chasing injuries. Like, like I said, fantasy football is hard enough. You don't run after people who are hurt, because if you or who are injury prone, I guess, because if you start doing that, you're going to start losing. It's the reason why some guys end up in the late first round or at least running backs end up in the late first round instead of getting drafted top 5. Guys like Melvin Gordon back in the day, 3 years ago, he would never get in the top 5, even though he would perform as a top 5 running back, because there was always 4 games that he missed every year. So, do not invest high draft capital on injured players. Rick, why don't you tell us about the second one?
Yeah, it's don't pass up on talent. There's a lot of guys this year that fell in drafts that have been historically good players. And I told Morgan about this one, and he was kind of like, because like he's a big situation over talent, and I really
situation over talent, but they both mixed.
They both mixed. Yeah, exactly. And I'm with you on that. But I think my point is what don't pass up on talent is guys that are already in situations that don't change and they still fall just because there's a new shiny toy. Like a Miles Sanders, like a Clyde Edwards-Helaire that flies up the draft boards and pushes a guy like maybe Derrick Henry back. He fell to a lot of late first round picks, and he was somebody that we knew was going to be at least a top like 7 running back, top 8 running back. That fell to late first round. He ended up being the RB3. Stephon Diggs was someone who did change the situation, but it wasn't a crazy change. I thought it was, which is why I wasn't super high on him. But you were like, well, he's still a super talented player, and John Brown is not going to, and Cole Beasley and those guys aren't going to take away crazy targets because he's Stephon Diggs. And even DeAndre Hopkins, who like a little bit, we were both not down on necessarily. Like I came around on DeAndre Hopkins by the end. And I think you did too. I remember I sent out a tweet in like late August saying like Hopkins will be good like for where he's getting drafted, and he ended up doing exactly that. But there was a lot of people that had like the Odell Beckham thing in their mind, and they're like, well, star receiver going to a new team is just not going to work out. But it worked out with Diggs, it worked out with Hopkins. We look at Aaron Rodgers, there's Keenan Allen. There was a lot of examples this year of just talented, historically good players falling down in drafts and being steals for teams. Now there's always situations like Mark Ingram that people are like, oh, he's a good player and he fell down in the draft, but he stunk. Well, Mark Ingram, it was a different situation. They drafted J.K. Dobbins. Yeah. He's on the last year of his contract. He's 30 years old for running back, which is one of the oldest running backs in the National Football League. You have to pay attention to stuff like that. It's not just like the name recognition. It's different than that. You have to look at the talent. Is the situation really changed? And is he still in the prime of his career, like a Diggs, like a Rodgers? Like guys like that, and Hopkins. So yeah, I would say something that I learned this year, instead of going for the new shiny toy, just don't pass up on talent. If the guy is good and he's good, take him.
Yeah, and I want to note that there was also another guy that I think a lot of people, you gave the description of Stephon Diggs.
Yeah.
There's another guy that had the same situation happen to him, and it was DeAndre Hopkins. And I think even we said that he was going to be a bust. DeAndre Hopkins
did in the beginning of the year.
Yeah,
we did in like July. But I tweeted out in like late August before the season started that and the tweet even says like I've been down on Hopkins, but if he's there in the late second round, I'm absolutely taking him.
Yeah,
which
he was.
Yeah, and that's where did he finish? Wide receiver 5.
Wide receiver,
which
5,
is kind of
through 17 weeks.
Where he was the wide receiver like 6, 7 of where we had him. Like I'm
gonna set a precedent right now. By the way, we're gonna use all 17 weeks because next year there's probably gonna be 17 games. So let's just do that.
All right.
But anyway, yeah, Hopkins is that guy.
Yeah.
As well as Stephon Diggs, who was also Diggs has never been a top 5 wide receiver. He's always been like 8 or 9, so that was kind of surprising as well as he did play. But sometimes a guy is just good and they get like, I don't even know the reasoning necessarily. I mean, I understand why you had him lower and why we were thinking that he wasn't going to be maybe as good as he was on Minnesota. But like literally Diggs was coming from a team who doesn't throw the football a lot to a team that we thought didn't throw the football a lot. So where was the variable where things were going to change for Diggs? Like, I don't...
Right, yeah, no.
And it's the same thing with Hopkins. Like, I understand that when you look at the Arizona Cardinals, you seem to think that, oh, maybe, they're not going to give him the ball enough. But Hopkins is he has one of the best hands and some of the best route running that we've ever seen in our lives.
Yeah.
So it's like you just automatically think Hopkins is not going to be a good wide receiver. That's absolutely insane. I think for me, a lot of people are drawing parallels to the previous with these two guys, more specifically to the previous years, because in fantasy football you're always trying to find a historical precedent that has been set. For me, I'm always looking at like QB1s never repeat as QB1s the following year, right?
Yeah.
And you're always looking for historical precedents that can't be overthrown. And I think what a lot of people looked at was the previous year when the Cleveland Browns picked up Odell Beckham, and then Odell got hurt. Or just didn't perform. Did he get hurt in 2019?
Odell?
Yeah. I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
But he just didn't perform the way you would anticipate. And so I think people just assumed that because Hopkins and Diggs were leaving their course,
it scared a lot of people.
Their respective teams. It scared a lot
including
of people. Including me. Into believing that they could be good. Now, Diggs is more understandable. Hopkins, I don't get.
Yeah, because that's a team that...
I don't even know why I was like thinking he was going to be
It was just because the Cardinals... kind of they run the ball more than you think they do. and that's partly because Kyler Murray runs the ball a decent amount.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, at least I switched up on Hopkins by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But my thing with Diggs was just it was a very run heavy team, and I didn't think Josh Allen would take. I thought he would take a step, which is why we had him as a breakout quarterback, but not as big a step. And I thought John Brown, Colby, like they would all get looks. Diggs would be the guy, but it wouldn't be as crazy as it was.
Yeah, and I think I have been a guy that is very much about situation, like Rick said. For me, I think like if you had traded DeAndre Hopkins to the middle of nowhere with a terrible quarterback, like had he gone to, I don't know, the Jets, he would be good because the Jets still have Darnold. But
he just wouldn't get a lot of touchdowns.
He just wouldn't get a lot of touchdowns. He wouldn't score a lot. It wouldn't be the same situation.
He'd probably still get like 10 targets a game.
But when you look at like a team like Arizona, him going there, it makes more sense that that's a better offense, right? Or you go and you look at Diggs and Diggs being dropped into Buffalo. Buffalo won 10 games last season, I think. And it's like their offense was still good regardless of how it was played. And Josh Allen wasn't maybe the best quarterback in fantasy football. Or the best quarterback in the league, but he was able to get the job done and made John Brown, I think, a top 15 wide receiver that year.
Yeah.
So that was my point in the offseason, was John Brown being a top 15 receiver the previous year. Why can't Diggs do the same thing? You know what I mean? Why can't Diggs be a wide receiver one again and be a top 12 guy? Because I think he's better than John Brown.
I think this year we're going to have similar situations. I think Ezekiel Elliott's going to fall down a lot of drafts because people are recency bias, but we know what Zeke is. And in redraft, I don't love him in Dynasty, but in redraft, with Dak back, I think he's going to have a good year. And there's going to be a lot of people passing on the talent. Right. I think Allen Robinson, if he goes to a new team, depending on the team, some people might be very hesitant on him. And I might be too, depending on where he goes. Yeah. But if he goes in a decent situation like Hopkins did with the Cardinals, and he's got at least a decent quarterback with a good situation, don't be hesitant just because he's on a new team. He's a talented wide receiver. Like, there's going to be guys like that this year that I don't want to pass on.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, the talent over situation thing, I really don't think I don't think you can choose one over the other.
I think if there's one position, though, where talent does kind of overcome it, it is receiver.
Okay.
To a degree. Compared to running back, because running back, you need the offensive line. You need kind of a good... You need the touches.
You need a quarterback.
You do need a quarterback, but there's been situations where, like, you can still get... you still need a good situation. I think anything you do...
Anywhere you go, it doesn't matter. And I think the other comparison that you can draw, too, is the rookie running back situation between Jonathan Taylor and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And everyone was high on Clyde Edwards-Helaire being a top 5 running back this year, a top 10 running back this year, because... he was in a really good situation. He was drafted in. He was not even a part of like people's top 5 running backs pre-draft, but then he was like the 101 in a lot of dynasty drafts because of the situation. So it's like sometimes a situation you can overcompensate a little bit. I'm not saying Clyde's not a talented person, but Jonathan Taylor is another situation where it may not have been the best situation for him. Like, he had a good offensive line.
Well, I think the Marlon Mack
he had a good situation, but I think walking into on a team with Marlon Mack, who's a starting running back, and other assets that they had, even you saw midway through the season, they started giving it to Wilkins and giving it to Hines. And so it just didn't look like a situation that Jonathan Taylor could succeed in. But if you drafted him, you ended up getting a guy, Marlon Mack goes down week 1, and a guy who ended up being, an RB7 on the season?
RB6.
So it's absolutely insane what you can get out of guys if you go for talent. And so I think for me, like talent over situation or situation over talent, it really isn't that. It's just sometimes a guy's good. Now,
I think you need both.
There's other situations where you look at this where you might say, oh, well, I drafted Melvin Gordon and Todd Gurley, talent over situation. Talent. I didn't pass on those guys. And then all of a sudden,
RB13?
Yeah, I guess. But I think looking at those guys, you could also say people will think they're talented and that they're not. But you have to understand where these guys are coming from and what the situation is going forward. Yeah. Like for a guy like Odell had been dealing with like 14 ACL injuries and all kinds of problems throughout his career. And when he left the New York Giants, he just wasn't good anymore. You know what I mean? And when he left the New York Giants, he just wasn't great anymore. He wasn't that wide receiver that we thought, and he hadn't been able to hold on to that. And so going to Cleveland, it was a situation where you were looking at him thinking that he was going to just smash, and it didn't work out. But for me, I think it comes down to looking at those guys, knowing Todd Gurley. He's not old, but he's had the knee problems. Looking at Melvin Gordon and going, you know what? He's old. Philip Lindsay, and he's a little bit older, and he's probably not going to be the greatest. Same thing with Mark Ingram. Same thing with guys. Who's the other guy I'm thinking of?
Le'Veon Bell was drafted high. Bell.
Yeah, and so it's like you have to look at these situations and circumstances and use your mind and understand that, yes, sometimes talent, like, you don't pass on it, but at the same time, you have to scout a little bit. It's not just simply going, oh, I think Le'Veon Bell's a great running back, so I'm going to draft him.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think at the running back position, you saw this year, there was a lot of older guys in that situation. But even Todd Gurley, I was really high on Todd Gurley, if you remember correctly, like in the offseason and all the mock drafts, I was taking Todd Gurley and all that stuff. And I took Todd Gurley in a lot of leagues. And he was great in the first half of the season. And I traded him away in every league I owned him at the bye week. And the reason I did that was because you could see the trends with him getting older. They were kind of going to Brian Hill. He had an awful schedule. Yeah. And I ended up making the right decision. But in the weeks 1 through 9, he was the RB6 in fantasy, Todd Gurley.
Yeah. And then following that, it was...
yeah. Well, my point is, though, like, even in a situation like that, you still have to evaluate the situation. You still have to evaluate each situation for each player. Even if it's like...
This is why we've always thought, like, the first year we did fantasy football content, very first year, I think it was 2018 into 2019, and we spent a lot of time talking about players that we just simply wouldn't draft. You know what I mean? And then this last year we kind of trended away from that a little bit. And for me, going into this season, there's not a single player that I'm looking at. There's only a couple that I would say I'm simply not drafting this player.
Yeah.
But don't look at a situation and go, oh, well, I'm not going to draft that player because I just don't want to draft him. There's always draft capital for that player. Like if Todd Gurley is a 4th-round pick, he didn't have the best season ever, but if he's a late 4th rounder, it might not be a bad idea to snag him. Now it depends on situation.
And then just trade him in the right time to trade him. Right.
So it's like everything has a situation. There's always a right time to take a player. For me, it's not necessarily about don't draft a guy. It's if this guy is in the 3rd round, don't draft him. You know what I mean? If he's in the 6th round, draft him. You know what I mean? So draft capital matters way more than normal situations. But we got to move on to the next one because we spent 10 minutes on this? This is probably the most hotly debated one before the show.
Yeah.
But anyway, number 3, it's find yourself a league-winning running back. My goodness. I.e. Dalvin Cook. I think guys with Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara were in the fantasy championship, whereas people who drafted my guy Miles Sanders or Josh Jacobs, who weren't in the fantasy championship, maybe made it to the semis.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest concern, and I was watching another podcast earlier today, and they talked about how there were 14 running backs taken in the first 2 rounds, and you could say 3 of them weren't a bust.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's Derrick Henry.
I can go through
Cook.
I can go through the list right now of running backs. These are the top 10 running backs from this year, right? Christian McCaffrey injured. Now, I'm just gonna say injured players are busts because they got injured.
Yeah, and it's not their fault though.
Not their fault. McCaffrey, Barkley hurt. Elliott, Dak got hurt. Zeke's bust. Alvin Kamara worked out. Dalvin Cook worked out. Derrick Henry worked out. Joe Mixon bust. Nick Chubb was good. Got hurt a couple games, but when you had him, he was really good. So the 5-6 weeks that he was out,
it's debated because he was really good, but he did miss a big chunk of the season.
Yeah. So, but that I think was a decent draft pick, and then you have Josh Jacobs, who was meh, okay,
very meh,
and then Kenyon Drake, who was
same thing,
kind of meh, but also a bust.
Yeah.
So like when you look at the guys, that's just the top 10. You maybe hit on 3 guys, like a big hit on 3 guys, and they were all in the middle of the first round. And so it's like, for me, you have to find that league-winning running back. It's hard, but whether it's through the draft, through trades, through the waiver wire, James Robinson, whatever it takes, you need to get yourself a league-winning running back, because if you don't have a Dalvin Cook, if you don't have an Alvin Kamara, you're not winning the championship. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like you can have, I had Calvin Ridley, who was a top 5 wide receiver, based on points per game,
Josh Allen for a
I had
while.
Allen Robinson, who was a top receiver, and I had a lot of really good low-end running back ones, RB2s on my team, and I didn't even make the freaking playoffs.
Yeah, I think there's some situations where you can win a championship without those top guys, but it is so hard to do. Yeah. It is so hard. The easiest way to win a championship is having a league-running running back.
Yeah.
And what I would say is you try to find that guy in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't find that guy in the first round and you missed, then you don't have many options, but you could still find a David Montgomery. I think he was considered a league winner, especially what he did in the second half. James Robinson could have helped carry you to that point. Jonathan Taylor, if you could have found Jonathan Taylor late or in a trade, especially when he was down, because he was like the RB20 something. He finished RB6 just because of what he did in the last like 6 games of the season. And then even like at a guy like to a lower extent, Kareem Hunt could have helped get you to that point. If you had, like, let's say, a David Montgomery who you knew was going to break out in the second half, or Jonathan Taylor you knew was going to break out in the second half, and someone to carry you in the first half, Kareem Hunt would have been perfect. He was, the RB6, RB5 for the first half. So if you can't find that guy in the first round, it's going to be hard, which is why we highly suggest taking a running back in the first round every year.
That's like a what are we, a 3A?
Yeah, unless you're picking like 9th or 10th, and you got Devontae Adams there, like fine.
Take Adams,
yeah, take Adams.
But yeah, I think Rick texted me earlier today, and he was like, even though because this is one of the things he wanted to throw in the show, and I guess it kind of went in with 3. That's why I say this is like 3A. Is he texted me and he said that a lot of zero wide receiver or zero running back people are taking victory laps after this season, even though Michael Thomas was
exactly their guy was Michael Thomas.
So give me a break with that. But I think for me, you have to draft. It's getting more and more important to draft running backs early, because any running back that you're not drafting in the top 10 is assumed to not have the full-time workload. And that, I hate to say that, but it's the truth. And if that's the case in a league that's trending towards RBBC, which we'll talk about in a second, it's going to be very hard to find a running back in later rounds.
Exactly,
now, if you lucked out, if you drafted Jonathan Taylor and you got him for most of the season and he worked out, or you had, other guys, like we picked up James Robinson off the waiver wire or something like that, and that's playing fantasy football outside of the draft, which is success. So it's not really lucky. It's just you playing smart. But it's one of those situations where you have to get yourself a running back in those early rounds, because if you don't, you're gonna be begging people. There are several teams in our fantasy league that did not draft running backs early.
Well, never mind.
You drafted running backs early, but there was one person that drafted 3 wide receivers early.
Yes.
And I was like, so
they did 0 running
who
back.
are you gonna get at running back? And they drafted like Raheem Mostert. And I was like, okay, well, I like Raheem as much as the next guy, but yeah, it was just not a good situation. And I'm like, I'm not judging people's draft strategies, but he literally had no other choice than Mostert and Singletary.
Yeah.
Because at that time, it just didn't work. So it's like, you need to draft the running backs early. Like that's 3A right there. But finding yourself a league-winning running back, we were talking about league-winning players last year. We'll make that more concise and say league-winning running back, because I think you can have Devontae Adams and Stefan Diggs and some of the top 5 wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, and still not make that. We had Hopkins was on the team that lost in the first round. Tyreek Hill was on a team that didn't make the playoffs in our league, to give you a little bit of perspective. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 4, he was on a team that didn't make the playoffs, my team. And then, Justin Jefferson, he was on a team that made the playoffs, but that wasn't even expected. So it's like, when you look at the wide receivers, I mean, it just doesn't compute.
The team that took Michael Thomas was the worst team in the league, right?
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Like this year, I'm going to try to take 3 running backs early.
Yeah.
And it's also because of what we can do at the wide receiver position, which do you want to talk about now? Move into that?
Yeah, let's do it.
And that is because you can find a wide receiver anywhere.
Number 4.
Which is kind of what we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, Calvin Ridley, 4th round pick. Tyreek Hill, 2nd round pick. Devontae Adams. So Devontae Adams was like the guy that you had to take in the first round, or you had to trade for when he was injured while you could. Tyreek Hill, you could have drafted 2nd round, fine. But Stefan Diggs, what was that, 5th round pick?
Yeah.
Calvin Ridley, 4th round pick.
Yeah.
Hopkins, late 2nd, so that one you find.
Jefferson, nowhere.
Metcalf was like a 4th round pick.
Yeah.
Thielen was like
4th or 5th.
Yeah, he was like fourth. I know early he kind of changed. I know he was at the third some point, but he was all over the place.
Thielen was a third, fourth round.
Yeah,
pick.
It's like third, fourth. Tyler Lockett was like a fifth round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Evans was like a third round pick. AJ Brown was like a fifth round pick. So Allen Robinson, Robert Woods, Keenan Allen, all these guys fifth round picks. Brandon Cooks was like an eighth round pick.
But
so that's a top 15 right there, right?
Yeah.
Most of those guys are in the third, and even you can find second. So second to fifth round, I think that is those rounds that I want to draft receiver. I want to go running backs first 3 rounds for me,
and 3 to 5. We don't like to subscribe to a specific strategy. Like I said,
true.
If a guy is there, like Rick said, if you're late in the first round and Adams is still there, and you take Devontae Adams.
I think, yeah. But my dream is getting like 3 really good running backs, and then 4th and 5th round, you get your 2 receivers. And hopefully, and it wasn't that hard to hit. You drafted Calvin Ridley and Allen Robinson. A lot of people drafted Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf, Adam Thielen. If you drafted one, AJ Brown, if you drafted one of those guys, Robert Woods, who I drafted, and I even drafted Terry McLaurin, who was a 5th round pick and was in the top 10 for a while, and then he got injured, right? So that's another guy.
Mm-hmm.
All guys in the 4th or 5th round, that's like the gold mine for wide receivers. You look at even the year before that, remember Chris Godwin was like the breakout guy in the 5th round. You can always find those guys in the 4th and 5th round,
right?
To draft. So that's, I think, the gold mine. And then, as you said, we can draft wide receiver, or you find wide receivers anywhere. So even guys like Justin Jefferson, Brandon Cooks, and Will Fuller before he got suspended.
Mm-hmm.
Players like that, Chase Claypool.
You could literally go into your garbage can and pull out a piece of paper and find a good wide receiver.
Yeah, T. Higgins before Joe Burrow got hurt, all that stuff.
I think the interesting thing too you have to really look at is that, like, I was just looking at the wide receiver 1 through 15, right? Outside of Adams and Hill and maybe Stefan Diggs. Outside of those 3 guys, Diggs had 16 points per game, Tyreek Hill had 19 points per game, Devontae Adams had 21 points per game, this is half PPR. After that, Calvin Ridley had 15, and then I'm just going to go down all the way to 15. It was 15, Hopkins 14, Jefferson 14, Metcalf 14, Thielen 14, Lockett 13, Evans 13, A.J. Brown 15, Allen Robinson 13, Robert Woods 12.5, Keenan Allen 13.9, and then Brandon Cooks 12.8. Can you tell me what the difference is in fantasy football between a guy who's getting 14 points per game and a guy who's getting 13.9 points per game?
It's not a big difference.
Like, if you're telling me the difference between the wide receiver 4, I can even take Calvin Ridley off that list and just go from wide receiver 5 all the way down to wide receiver 15. If you're telling me the difference between those guys is 1 fantasy point or maximum of 1.5 fantasy points, you should be drafting wide receivers in rounds 3 to 5.
Yeah.
Like, if you did not have one of those 4 guys in I take Calvin Ridley out of that conversation because he didn't even average, and maybe you can throw Diggs into that conversation as well. But like Rick said, it's like there is no difference, and then you can keep going down. You know what I mean? Like, even these guys that were probably wide receiver 2s on teams: Amari Cooper 11.9, Malvin Jones 11.9, Juju Smith-Schuster 11.6, Chase Claypool 11.5, CeeDee Lamb 11.3, Terry McLaurin 12. Like, it doesn't take a drop until like wide receiver 34. It's astounding to me when you look at the numbers. You can literally find a wide receiver anyway, a startable wide receiver. I am starting to get to this point. I don't want to say it yet, but I wanted to say it before the season, and I still don't want to say it.
Okay.
You might be able to stream wide receivers.
No.
There are so many of them, dude.
What do you mean by stream? Because you can't pick them up.
No, I know. You can't pick them, but like,
I know. I get what you're trying to say.
If you say, I don't mean like go to the waiver wire and stream them. That would be absolutely asinine. I mean, it's possible. There's guys every week that get big performances. If you can, I want to try. I might just draft running backs through 5 rounds and just try to do, not next year in a real league that I want to win, but another league that I just want to try to see if it works.
Draft a quarterback high too, a tight end high.
Yeah. But anyway, but my point is that if you draft like 4 or 5 wide receivers in the middle rounds that are all equivalent, one guy that you think is going to break out, maybe more of a safer pick and stuff like that going through the rounds, you might be able to just go, okay, I'm going to start this guy this week because it's a good matchup, and just rotate 4 or 5 wide receivers in your wide receiver slot instead of going, oh, you know what? I need Devontae Adams.
Right.
Because, like, if you had Devontae Adams, that was great. But, like, the difference between, and even if you take Tyreek Hill's 52-point game out, and he was in the same conversation as, like, the Justin Jefferson 14 points per game.
Yeah.
So, to me, like, you literally can find wide receivers anyway. The waiver wire, trades. Like, I was so funny. This year, I was in several leagues trying to make trades, right? And everyone needed running backs. Yeah. Everyone.
That's
and
why
no
you take
one
them
need
early.
Wide receivers.
You will be a gold mine.
Yeah, and let everyone else do zero running back, because if you go into a draft and then you get out of your draft, you're gonna have so much capital to trade away. It's gonna be unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I had a team with a lot of really good running backs, and a lot of people would come to me daily and be like, "Hey, what do you want for your running backs?" Because they were so desperate. They had one running back on their team that they could start on a weekly basis, and they desperately needed a running back. And my running backs weren't even amazing.
Right.
Sanders, Taylor. I don't even know who else I had. Kareem Hunt. Yeah. So I was like, my running backs weren't great, but they were good enough for a team to be like, I need a running back.
Yeah.
So like I said, wide receivers, I feel like they're becoming less valuable in season long. Not in terms of like their value positionally to your roster, because they're very valuable, like having a good wide receiver.
Especially
matters.
if you play like 3 receiver leagues. Too.
Right. But like I'm just in the context of like how important running backs are, not necessarily important, but how
the top guys too.
Weak the running back position is right now, as opposed to how strong the wide receiver position is. It's easy to trade those guys away. This is why we're probably going to herald this discussion all year of running backs early again.
Yep.
I hate to do it again, but we're going to have to do it again. But anyway, number 5 and the final thing on our list to conclude the show is RBBC is here to stay, and this is part of the reason why, as I just mentioned, the running back position is getting weaker. If you look at the running back position as a whole this year, the running back, and this, like, you talk about point differentials per position, like we were just talking about, difference between the wide receiver 5 and the wide receiver 15 was like 1.5 fantasy points.
Yep.
Right. The difference between the running back 5 and the running back 15 is a full 4.5 to 5 fantasy points.
Yeah. That's a big difference.
I'll say it again. 4.5 to 5 fantasy points.
Yeah.
That is a massive difference. And I think the reason why Kamara, Henry, Cook, Montgomery, Jones, I can start after Jones, you can kind of start taking them out, but like, there's not a lot of running backs left in the NFL that are that are not in an RBBC. Like, Aaron Jones is probably the most shocking to me because he enters into the top 5 and he's ridiculously good, and he spends 40% of his games on the bench. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's crazy to me how efficient he is. But I think that
even Alvin Kamara is kind of in an RBBC a little bit with
a little bit. But it's like the trend that you're seeing now in the NFL is RBBC.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
and it's here to stay. And so the question that I want to ask us this offseason, me and Rick, and maybe we can get into a little bit right now, but is, as fantasy football, like, players, analysts, or whatever you are and wherever you're listening, like, what do we do? How do we deal with this on a weekly basis, on a yearly basis, in dynasty leagues? Like, how do we deal with the RBBC? Because the workhorse running back situation is a dying breed. There is only maybe a few coaches left in the NFL that subscribe to it. Yeah. Everyone likes multiple running backs.
I think what I would say is you can still get those top guys. There's still players that, as of right now, at least get close to workhorse work. And now I'm not even saying that players are going to get workhorse work long term, because, as you said, it's kind of dying.
Yeah.
But I think even if you're in an RBBC, there's still, in not every situation, but in some, there's still a dominant guy. Aaron Jones, for example. Nick Chubb.
Right.
Even though Kareem Hunt is still good and such limited work, but Nick Chubb does get the majority of the work.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Taylor with Naheem Hines there still gets majority of the work. There's still guys that even if they split.
Aaron Jones, baby. Still that RBBC.
Yeah. But there's still guys, even if they split, it feels like they still get the majority of the work. Maybe it's like a 60-40, a 65-35.
Yeah.
And you got to identify those guys.
Yeah. I think,
but it's hard, man.
It's hard because you don't the running back position is so, like, we talk about the wide receiver position being, predicated on target share. I drafted Allen Robinson this year because even though he's not in the most efficient offense on the face of the planet, he's going to get 10 targets a game. Calvin Ridley is in the same offense, maybe not the most efficient offense, but my God, he's going to get 12 targets a game, and I love that. The running back position is more complex in the fact that you have to track how many rushes there are per game, how many targets that they get, how often they catch the ball, how efficient their running is. You know what I mean? How efficient their pass catching is. Like, Derrick Henry might catch 20 passes, but Lord knows he's only getting 70 yards out of it. I hope they pass it to him more and he gets more efficient pass catching over the course of his career. But my goodness, the man can't do anything after the catch. So anyway, I think for the running back position, and that's the other thing too, is that if you get yourself a guy like Derrick Henry who's a pounder, and then you get yourself a pass catching running back, Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines is an example. Hines is out there now. Do I think that Hines should be out there on passing downs? No, you should have your a perennial star running back who probably is going to be a dominant figure in the NFL for a long time on the field late in games. The wild card round this week, you had Hines on the field, and Hines dropped a freaking pass right out of his hands.
Hines was good though.
Yeah,
he had like 3 30-yard runs in a row.
Oh wow,
he had like 90 yards on like 9 carries.
But that's what they like, is that, like, in the old NFL, you could game plan for one running back. Now you can't. You have to game plan for multiple running backs. And I think that's why people like it, is because it adds an air of... That's why Bill Belichick used it for years before people started to catch on, because no one knew which running back was going to be the guy. It was going to be Rex Burkhead. It was going to be freaking... Who is that guy? Like Garrett Blount on a given week? Like Sony Michel on a given week? And he just likes having that rotation of guys. NFL teams are starting to see that is an advantage for them. So the question is, what can we do? And like I said, Rick kind of unpacked it a second ago. We'll kind of unpack it over the course of the whole offseason and discuss whether or not it's possible to even go with this. Because me and Rick, we talked about in the offseason, Hunt Chubb. Could you make that work? And you could.
You could have, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely drafted both guys.
Do I wish Hunt and Chubb were on separate teams making their money on the full workload? Yes, but you can't have that. Now, are we going to be talking next year about Zeke and Pollard?
Maybe.
Are we going to be talking about those two? So it is a situation where there are some teams, and this is where scouting, coaches, and all that stuff comes into play, like Gibson next year, right?
Yep.
Everyone's going to be ridiculously high on Gibson. Just watch. Me,
Cam Akers.
Myself included.
Marlon Mack's got to go somewhere.
I think the
running
back situation is going to be a little bit more concerning than anything else. But
yeah, but I mean, either way,
you get it. Yeah,
like the Miami might draft a running back. What does that mean for Myles Gaskin? The Broncos, they have Phillip Lindsay, Melvin Gordon again. Like, what do you want to do there? Like, there's just so many. The Jacksonville Jaguars might add a running back. Is James Robinson going to be the workhorse again? There's so many question marks.
The sad part is that when you look at a lot of teams, there's there's rarely multiple running backs in the top 24 on the same team. Like this year we had Cleveland and I believe Washington, and those were really the only two teams that had two running backs in the top 24. And so in a league where you have RBBCs, the secondary running back that's stealing work from the main running back is not really giving you a good option as an RB2.
Yep.
Which kind of blows.
Right.
I mean, the RB24 had 151 fantasy points. Man, it's tough.
That is tough. That's
so bad.
Yikes. It's a big yikes.
Like, just get your big guy and then rotate that third position, man. I
honestly, you know what? I did, and it almost got me to the playoffs because I had Joe Mixon, and Myles Gaskin missed a big chunk of the season as well.
Yeah.
So those guys were on IR for me, and I had no running back. So I picked up waiver wire guys, and sometimes it didn't work out.
Yeah.
But then sometimes I would get like a 20-point week from Duke Johnson.
Is RBBC possible? Not you need one star running back on your team because you got to start two. But is RBBC possible at a running back position in fantasy football?
Yeah, I think it's hard to do. Again.
RBBC on your own personal fantasy team, not in the NFL.
I would much rather have two set guys than do that. But it's possible. Like I said, I did it this year. I picked up if Chris Carson was out an hour before game time, Chris Carson out on a Thursday night game, I'd picked up Carlos Hyde, and he'd get me 16 fantasy points. And that's
so gross,
it's gross, but like if you have no other choice, that's what you got to do.
And I think the other issue too, this year more specifically, I don't know why, but just going through the top 12, I think there was 2 running backs, Kareem Hunt and Derrick Henry, who completed a full slate of games. Now, Kamara missed time. He played the last game of the regular season, didn't he? No. I'm trying to figure out how many of these guys didn't play. I know Montgomery missed time. Taylor missed a game. Jacobs missed a game. So, and then Zeke, I think, was just benched for the last game for Pollard, right? Or he was sick.
I think
for one game.
Yeah, I can't remember.
So this year we expected COVID to affect a lot of people. It didn't really affect. No one really has talked about how COVID didn't really affect fantasy football that much.
Yeah.
Like it affected how you played games because there was full out games that were canceled, but overall it didn't really hurt.
It didn't hurt that much, yeah.
I just got bubbly in my eyeball. Maybe that's a sign. We should just.
But that's crazy that the 49ers fullback Kyle Juszczyk had more points than Sony Michel, Le'Veon Bell, like guys that you actually drafted, Phillip Lindsay.
Yeah.
Like
But
crazy.
yeah, so the final point, just to reiterate, RBVC here to stay. So you got to learn how to play with it. We're going to try to unpack that this season. And then we also had another one. I said don't draft rookie wide receivers, pick them up off the waiver wire. Rick said no, you should use your late round picks on rookie wide receivers, but it doesn't really matter. We don't have any time to discuss it. That was just in there as a secondary one. So take it as you will. But yeah, that is our top 5 lessons learned from the 2020 fantasy football season. I had to turn around to hit the button on my iPad because this setup, man, if you saw behind the scenes, this room is not very big. So thank you for listening to Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Check our website, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and we will talk to you Tuesday, my dudes.
Take it easy.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.